Hey, if you're here watching, let me tell you a fact. Do not be deceived by a charming face. Do not be swayed by a calm voice. And never, never judge someone by the version of them you think you know. Because people don't always change. Sometimes they just get better at hiding who they've always been. And for Kay Baker, that was the first red flag she never saw. The night was warm, music played, glasses clinked. She laughed, she danced, she felt safe. Because in her mind, she was with someone she trusted, someone she had known for years, a man she once loved, and had given a second chance. She didn't know that second chances can be deadly. Because outside, beyond the glow of bar lights in the quiet darkness of the night, someone was waiting. Someone who felt disrespected, someone who had already made up his mind. She didn't see it. But someone else did. And soon, her laughter would be gone. Her voice silenced. And the man who once swore to love her would make sure she never saw the next sunrise. Hi, I'm Fletcher J. If this is your first time on my channel, welcome. Make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications and stay till the end. Because this one will stay with you. Now let's begin. She was the kind of person everyone wanted to be around. The kind of woman who could walk into a room and make it feel warmer just by being there. Kay Baker was a mother, a teacher, a friend. She had a light inside her, a way of making people feel safe, seen, understood. And maybe that's why she always saw the good in people. Even when the rest of the world saw warning signs, she saw potential. Even when someone had a past, she believed in their future. She believed in second chances. And for most of her life, that kindness, that belief, had been a gift. Until it wasn't, because not everyone deserves to be saved. And Kay Baker would learn that too late. It started like most love stories do. A familiar face from the past, or a chance encounter. A spark that never really went out. Matthew Terry wasn't a stranger. He was someone she had loved before. A high school boyfriend. A piece of her past. Back then he was charming, confident. The kind of guy who made you feel special just by looking at you. And when he reached out again, years later, he still had that same effect. A little older, a little wiser, but still the man she remembered. At least that's what she thought. Because the truth, the man she fell for at 17 was gone, and the man standing in his place was someone else entirely. At first, everything felt right. The chemistry was there just like before. The kind of connection that made you believe in fate. He was a Marine now, disciplined, structured, someone who had seen the world. He had stories to tell, experiences that made him seem deep, strong, protective. He said all the right things. And Kay, she believed him. Because why wouldn't she? People grow, people change. And after everything she had been through, maybe this was exactly what she needed. Maybe this was fate giving her another shot. But fate had nothing to do with it. Because Matthew Terry wasn't just a man with a past, he was a man running from it. The first red flag was so small, so insignificant, she didn't even notice it. A comment here, a look there, moments that on their own meant nothing. But together, they painted a picture she wasn't ready to see. He didn't like when she went out without him. He'd say it was because he missed her, because he worried. He didn't like when she spent too much time with her friends. He'd say it was because he wanted to be her priority. He didn't like when she mentioned an ex, even in passing. He'd say it was because he loved her too much to handle the thought. And Kay, she thought it was sweet. At first, but slowly the things he didn't like turned into things she couldn't do. She started cancelling plans, started checking in with him more, started making excuses for his moods. And her friends, the people who had always been there for her, started noticing. She didn't answer texts as quickly, she didn't laugh as much, and when they brought it up, she waved it off. She was fine, she was happy. Matthew loved her. He was just protective, just passionate, just misunderstood. And maybe that's what she told herself too. Maybe she needed to believe that, because the alternative was something too terrifying to admit. But here's the thing about control. It never starts big, it starts with something small. Something so subtle, so easy to overlook, that by the time you realise it's there, it's already wrapped itself around you. And by the time Kay saw it for what it was too late. Because she wasn't just dating Matthew Terry. She was trapped with him. What Kay didn't know, what no one told her, was that she wasn't the first. Matthew had been here before, with another woman, another relationship that started just like this, that ended in blood. Another woman who had believed in his love, who had trusted him, who had almost died because of it. And the most terrifying part? Kay knew her. Kay had seen her. Kay had sat in a courtroom, listening to her speak, and still chose to ignore the warnings. Because when you love someone, you don't want to believe they're capable of evil. But what if they are? What if the person you share a bed with, the person you think you know better than anyone, is someone else entirely? Kay Baker was not reckless. She was not naive. She was not weak. But she trusted the wrong man. And that trust would be the last mistake she ever made. It all began in a bar. The music was loud, the kind of loud that made it hard to think, hard to focus on anything but the moment. Laughter spilled across the room. Glasses clinked together in easy celebration. It was just another Friday night. At least that's how it felt to everyone, except him. Matthew Terry sat at the table, barely touching his drink. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't celebrating. He was watching, eyes locked onto Kay, tracking her every movement. The way she smiled, the way she leaned into conversation, the way people gravitated toward her without trying. And then, it happened. A man, not someone she knew, just another patron moving through the bar. He passed by her table, caught a joke midair, smiled as he walked past. Nothing more than a shared moment, a fraction of a second that meant nothing. But to Matthew, it was everything. Kay didn't notice the shift at first. She didn't see the way his posture stiffened, the way his grip around his glass tightened. She didn't feel the storm building inside him. Not until he leaned in. Close. Low enough that no one else could hear. "You embarrassed me." She turned toward him, confusion flickering across her face. "What?" "You embarrassed me." He repeated it like it was a fact, like she should already know what he meant. She laughed, brushing it off. It was nothing. But to him it was betrayal. The rest of the night should have gone on as planned. The drinks, the laughter, the music. But for Matthew, everything had already changed. Kay kept talking, kept enjoying herself. But he wasn't really there anymore. Not mentally, not emotionally. His thoughts had latched onto one thing and one thing only. That moment, that smile, that split-second interaction that played over and over in his head like a scratch on a record. He told himself it wasn't innocent. Told himself he saw something no one else did. That Kay wasn't just being friendly. That she had disrespected him. That she was humiliating him in front of everyone. And the more he thought about it, the worse it became. Because in Matthew's mind, this wasn't just about tonight. This was proof of something bigger, deeper, something she had been hiding all along. And the longer he sat there, staring at her, the more convinced he became. Kay had no idea. She was still the same person she had been when they walked into the bar, still talking, still trusting that everything was fine. But something was growing between them now. A wall. Something thick and invisible. Something he wouldn't let her climb over. She felt it in the way he touched her. A little too firm. A little too tense. In the way he looked at her. A little too hard, too unblinking. In the way his voice changed. Quieter now, but sharper. Like a blade pressed against the space between them. The night dragged on, and the tension only grew heavier. Kay's friends noticed. They saw the way Matthew wasn't engaging, saw the way his presence had shifted from a boyfriend to something else entirely. Someone on edge, someone waiting. And they weren't the only ones. Because Kay started to notice it too. Finally, it was time to leave. A night that should have been just another memory was coming to an end. Kay hugged her friends, said her goodbyes, and walked toward the door. Matthew followed. But something about the way he moved was different now. Too calculated, too quiet. Like a man carrying something heavier than just jealousy. And in the back of Kay's mind, a thought whispered. Something was wrong. She just didn't know what yet. But she would. Very soon she would. The night should have ended at the bar, but it didn't. Kay slid into the back seat of the Uber, her body still humming with the energy of the evening. The music, the laughter, the warmth of good company. But beside her, Matthew sat stiff, eyes straight ahead, hands locked together. No words, no movement. Just silence. Thick, suffocating silence. The kind that doesn't just settle in the air, but presses down, wrapping itself around your throat. She glanced at him, searching his face for something, anything to break the tension. But there was nothing there, only a quiet kind of rage. A storm brewing beneath the surface. Her phone buzzed in her lap. A message from a friend. Checking in, making sure everything was okay. Kay typed back quickly. LOL, sorry for that. All good now. A small reassurance. A way to smooth over the night, to push away the discomfort creeping up her spine. But deep down, something gnawed at her, because it wasn't good. She could feel it. A shift in the air. A presence beside her that felt wrong in a way she couldn't quite explain. She didn't know what it was, not yet. But she would. The car rolled to a stop in front of their house. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror, waiting for them to step out. Kay reached for the door handle, but Matthew still hadn't moved. Still hadn't spoken. She hesitated. His silence stretched between them, so thick it felt like a wall. She forced a small laugh, nudging him gently. Hey, you okay? Slowly he turned. His eyes, dark, unreadable, met hers. And finally he spoke. Let's go inside. A simple sentence. A casual invitation. But something about the way he said it made her stomach twist. As soon as they stepped out of the car, the cold air bit at her skin. The Uber's headlights illuminated the front yard for a brief moment, casting long shadows against the pavement. Then the car pulled away, its red taillights disappearing into the distance, leaving them alone. Matthew walked ahead, his footsteps too heavy, too deliberate. Kay followed, arms wrapped around herself, suddenly aware of how quiet their street had become. No voices, no movement, just the sound of shoes scraping against concrete. A chill ran through her, not from the cold, from something deeper, more primal. An instinct whispering in the back of her mind. Go inside, lock the door, keep the lights on. The key turned in the lock and the door swung open. Kay stepped inside first, flipping the light switch. Nothing. The bulb in the entryway flickered, then died. A burnt-out light. Something so small, so insignificant. But in that moment it felt like a warning. She swallowed, shaking off the unease. Matthew stepped in behind her, closing the door with a little too much force. The sound echoed through the house. And then, silence. Outside, a neighbour glanced toward their house. A brief moment of curiosity. Then from inside, the muffled sound of voices, tense, low. Not yet a fight, but something close. Minutes passed, a voice, sharp now. Then another pleading, a sudden slam, and then nothing. Not a single sound, not for the rest of the night, not until the screams came. The first sound wasn't loud, not at first. A thud, dull, heavy, like something falling to the floor. A muffled voice followed, strained, rising for just a second before being cut short. From the outside, it wouldn't have seemed like much. A neighbour turning over in bed might have mistaken it for a door slamming. A stray noise in the night, one of 100 meaningless sounds that make up the silence. But inside that house, it was the sound of something breaking, something final. The walls had heard everything. The sharp edge of an argument. The shift from words to something colder, harder. The moment fear replaced reason. No one knows exactly when Matthew snapped. Maybe it was the way she looked at him. Not with love, but with something closer to disgust. Maybe it was the way she turned her back, like she had already decided this was over. Or maybe, deep down, this had been coming for a long time. A fate sealed the moment she let him back into her life. Kay didn't have time to think about any of that. She barely had time to react. Because before she could reach for the door, before she could even step away, he was on her, and the night turned red. The first strike wasn't the worst. A flash of movement, the sting of something sharp, shock more than pain. The brain doesn't register wounds right away. There's too much adrenaline, too much confusion. For the first few seconds, all she knew was that something was wrong, that the floor felt too far away, that her body wasn't responding the way it should. And then, the second strike, and the pain flooded in. The body has an instinct to survive, a primal automatic response buried in muscle memory, in the deepest part of the brain. Run, fight, do whatever it takes. And Kay tried. She tried. She stumbled forward, hands reaching. For what, she wasn't sure. A door, a phone, a way out. She could hear his breathing behind her. Slow, focused, not panicked, not rushed, like a man in control, like someone who had already decided how this was going to end. She made it past the kitchen. Her hands slipped against the counter, gripping, pushing herself forward. The world tilted, a step, then another, and then the third strike. The knife cut through skin, through muscle. A deep wound meant to end it. She felt it before she understood it. A pressure, a tearing sensation. Then warmth. Then nothing. The floor rushed toward her, and suddenly she was falling. But she wasn't done yet. Somewhere in the back of her mind, through the pain, through the haze, a single thought pushed through. Not here, not in this house. If she was going to die, it wouldn't be here. She wasn't going to let him decide that. She moved, crawling now, one hand gripping her throat, the other dragging her forward. Every breath burned. Her body screamed at her to stop, to give up, to let go. But she didn't. She pulled herself through the doorway, through the yard, a trail of blood marking every inch she left behind. She didn't know where she was going, didn't know if that help was even close. She only knew she had to keep moving, because somewhere behind her, Matthew was still standing, still watching, waiting for her to stop. A neighbour stirred in bed, shifting under the blankets. A dog barked once, then fell silent. The street was quiet. The world had no idea what was happening, that just a few feet away, in the darkness, a woman was fighting for her life. Then another sound, a door creaking open. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching. And then, nothing. Silence. She lay there, chest rising, falling, blood pooling beneath her. Her fingers slick and shaking, pressed against her throat, as if she could hold in what was slipping away. She opened her mouth, tried to scream, tried to call out, but no sound came. The wound had taken that from her. Her voice, her last chance to beg for help. And as she lay there, fading, waiting, she felt something, a presence, standing above her, watching. And in her final moments, Kay Baker realised the truth. She was never going to be allowed to leave that house alive. The night was quiet again, still. A peaceful kind of silence, the kind that belongs to sleeping neighbourhoods, to empty streets where nothing ever happens, until someone opened their door, until someone saw. The neighbour had been awake for a while, tossing under the weight of restlessness, staring at the faint glow of a street lamp through their window. Then, a noise outside, not loud but unnatural, a rustling, a shape in the shadows. And then, something motionless in the grass. At first they squinted, trying to understand what they were looking at. A pile of clothes, a trash bag. Then the shape moved, a weak shift, a trembling hand pressing against the ground, and in the dim glow of the streetlight they saw it. A woman, face down, barely moving, blood soaking into the dirt beneath her. Their breath caught in their throat, their hearts slammed against their ribs. This wasn't a drunk person passed out in the yard. This wasn't someone who had tripped, who had fallen. This was something else, something horribly wrong. They stumbled back inside, hands shaking, lungs struggling to keep up. They grabbed their phone, dialed, and when the voice on the other end picked up, the words spilled out. "There's a woman. She's bleeding everywhere. Please hurry." The call was frantic, scattered. The operator tried to keep them calm, tried to get details. "Is she conscious?" A glance back through the window. The woman wasn't moving now. "I don't know. Do you know who she is?" I don't recognise her. She's outside. Is she breathing?" Silence. A pause long enough to send ice through the caller's veins. Then, a shallow rise and fall of her chest. Yes, but she needs help. She needs help now. The sirens came fast, red and blue flashing through the streets, bouncing off rooftops, swallowing the quiet with urgency. Tyres screeched against pavement, doors swung open, boots hit the ground, moving fast. They found her immediately, lifeless but not yet gone, a wound at her throat. Her fingers, slick with blood, still curled like they were trying to hold in what was slipping away. The paramedics moved in, voices quick, movements quicker, pressure, oxygen, hands pressing, working. A radio crackled, officers fanning out, looking for answers. Then, a voice from the darkness. We found something. At the edge of the property, where the yard gave way to trees, an officer had stopped. His flashlight hovered over a trail of blood leading into the woods. They followed it, one step at a time, each step sinking into the damp earth, their breath clouding in the cold air. And then, they saw him, a man in the shadows, still, silent, standing there like he belonged to the darkness itself. Blood coated his hands, his arms, his shirt, stained so deep it looked like it would never come clean. He didn't run, didn't fight, just stood there, staring, unblinking, waiting, as if he had already known this moment was coming, as if he had been waiting for them all along. The officers closed in, weapons drawn, voices sharp. "Get on the ground." No response. "Now." He blinked, tilted his head slightly, then almost too calmly. He dropped to his knees, held out his hands, and let them take him. No struggle, no last words, because his work was already done, because somewhere just feet away, in the back of an ambulance fighting against time, Kay Baker was losing the battle for her life. The name Matthew Terry meant nothing to the officers that night. To them, he was just a suspect, a man covered in blood, a man caught standing in the woods, silent, as the life he had destroyed slipped away. A crime of passion, a deadly moment of rage. But this wasn't passion, and it wasn't a moment. This had happened before, the same story, the same violence, only last time, the victim survived. 5 years earlier, in another city, another home, another night. Michelle Rogers had fought for her life too. She had run, had bled, had pleaded, and somehow she had lived to tell the story. A story that should have been a warning, a red flag big enough to stop what happened to Kay Baker. But no one had listened. And now another woman had paid the price. Michelle's story started just like Kay's. A relationship, a slow, creeping kind of control, a temper that hid beneath sweet words and soft apologies, a jealousy that grew into something sharper, something that turned love into ownership. And then, one night, a night like any other, until it wasn't. They had argued, she had tried to leave, and Matthew, he had decided she wasn't allowed to. The first hit knocked her to the ground, the second left her dizzy, confused, scrambling for breath. She didn't even feel the knife at first, not until she saw the blood, not until she realised it was hers. The attack had been brutal. But Michelle fought. She fought harder than he expected. When he thought she was too weak to move, she ran. When he thought she was too scared to fight back, she did. She crawled through her own blood, reaching for survival with everything she had left. And when she finally made it outside, when she screamed, that was what saved her. That was the only reason she was still breathing, because someone heard, someone called for help. And when the police arrived, they found Matthew Terry just like they would years later. Standing still, blood on his hands, looking like he didn't understand what he had done. He was arrested, charged, convicted, but not for attempted murder. Somehow in a courtroom filled with evidence, filled with Michelle's testimony, her wounds, her pain, the charges were reduced, 10 years in prison. That's what he got. And he didn't even serve that, just 3 years. 3 years and then they let him walk free. If Michelle had died that night, if her body had been found in the dirt instead of fighting for breath in a hospital bed, would he have stayed behind bars? Would the system have kept him from doing it again? Maybe. But that's not what happened. Instead, he was released. He left that town. He moved on. And eventually, He found Kay. She never knew what he had done. She never knew the history behind the man who sat across from her, who held her hand, who whispered about forever. And if she had? Would she have stayed? Would she have believed it? Would she have seen what was coming before it was too late? This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a sudden snap. It was a pattern, a cycle, a history of violence, control, and deadly obsession. And the justice system had let him do it again. The courtroom was silent. Not the kind of silence that brings peace. The kind that feels heavy, suffocating. The kind that sits between families, between grief and justice, between what happened and what should have been prevented. The kind of silence that exists only after irreversible loss. The trial wasn't about proving guilt. There was no mystery here. The evidence was everywhere. The blood, the knife, the 911 call, the history. Everything led back to one man, one decision, one night. Still he sat there, expression blank, a man who had already accepted his fate. But for Kay Baker's family, for her children, there was no acceptance, because what had been taken from them could never be replaced. The prosecution didn't hold back. They laid it out in sharp, brutal detail. A man who had done this before, who had been given another chance, and used it to destroy another life. They read Michelle Rogers' testimony aloud. Every wound, every attempt to escape, every word she had spoken, pleading for the world to listen. And then, they read Kay's final moments. The struggle, the desperate crawl for help, the silence that followed. Matthew Terry didn't testify. There was nothing left to say. The defense could only try to shift the blame. Alcohol, jealousy, a loss of control. But rage is not an excuse. Jealousy is not a justification. And a man's inability to control himself should never cost a woman her life. The jury saw through it. They didn't need long to decide. Guilty on all counts, life in prison. No possibility of walking free again. This time the justice system kept him locked away, but it was too late. Kay Baker was already gone. Michelle sat in the courtroom when the verdict was read. She had survived him. She had tried to stop this from happening, and no one listened. Now she sat among strangers, among heartbreak, watching another family grieve the way hers almost had. She walked away from that courthouse knowing the truth. Matthew Terry had been stopped, but not before he had done what he always wanted to do. Not before he had proved that when men like him are given second chances, women like Kay Baker don't get one. In the end, the truth wasn't complicated. Kay Baker had believed in love, believed in redemption, believed that a man could change, but he didn't. And she lost everything trying to prove he could. One dance, one night, and a man who decided she wouldn't see the next morning. Short pause, then a warm, sincere tone for the call to action. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Stories like Kay Baker's should never have to be told. But they do, because the warning signs are always there, because too often we hear about them when it's already too late. So if this story meant something to you, if it made you think, if you believe voices like Kay's and Michelle's deserve to be heard, please support this channel. Like, share, subscribe. It helps more than you know, and it makes sure stories like this one don't get forgotten. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.